Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Anita Markovski, and I am AMSA's Advisor Safety Liaison based in Sydney, New South Wales. On behalf of the team and AMSA, we're excited to have you here as we dive into some of the upcoming changes to Marine Order 504. These changes will come into effect on the 1st of June 2025. Today is the second in our series of 3 SMS webinars. The topic is changes to safety management system requirements. Before I get into the housekeeping and introductions, I'd like to acknowledge country. In the spirit of reconciliation, we here at the Australian Maritime Safety Authority would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and also acknowledge the connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and also extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here on the webinar today. Okay, with regards to housekeeping, please be aware there is a 30-second delay. Today's webinar is being recorded. You will receive a link to the recorded webinar afterwards. If you'd like to turn on live captioning, please do so by clicking the captions at the top of your Teams window. Throughout the presentation, we'll break into multiple Q&A sessions. Please stick around until the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, please post in the Q&A chat and our AMSA experts Nathan, David, Tobin and Natalia will answer them along the way. You can choose to post questions anonymously if you like. We will make sure we respond to all questions either during the webinar or afterwards. And also give us a thumbs up if you see a question in the chat that you want answered too. We will also ask you to complete a short survey at the end of the presentation, and we'd appreciate your feedback. Okay, now to introduce the team today, we have Steve Whitesmith, AMSA's Liaison Officer in Fremantle, Western Australia, and Desley Thompson, our Advisor Safety Liaison, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, based in Cairns, Queensland. Our presenter today is Steve, and I'll hand over to you now to begin the presentation.
Thanks, Anita, and thank you to everyone who's attending today. As you can see from the slide, there are 7 areas that we'll cover in this webinar. So let's begin. We start with drug and alcohol policy requirements in your safety management system. This has been added to address the risks associated with drug and alcohol use. It is important to remember that this amendment is non-prescriptive and allows owners the flexibility to assess the specific risks to their operation with appropriate mitigations. Your master and crew need to be involved in discussions about this policy. When developing your drug and alcohol policy, consider instructions on what is acceptable and unacceptable drug and alcohol use when working on a vessel. This could include whether to have a dry vessel where no alcohol, prohibited drugs or non-prescription medication are allowed, or whether to permit crew to have a limited supply of alcohol at the end of their workday. Where alcohol is allowed, consider how this will be managed and any impact it may have on crew's ability to undertake duties during an emergency. Drug and alcohol disclosure. Consider whether to request crew members to inform you about any prescription medications they're taking. This could be important to know in case there are undesirable effects from the medication, such as drowsiness. It will also enable you to have a full understanding of medications required in a medical emergency. Drug and alcohol testing. Consider whether to conduct drug and alcohol testing prior to crew boarding the vessel as part of your pre-departure checks. And also where a crew member may be unfit for duty or under the influence. Consider how you will manage a situation where the master or a crew member is determined to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol and unfit for duty. As you can see from the slide, AMSA has developed some example policies to assist vessel owners in developing their own. These two examples could relate to masters and crew on a Class 1, 2 or 3 vessel. Additional requirements would be required for passengers being carried on a Class 1 or 2 vessel, including responsible service of alcohol laws that may be applicable in your state or territory. These examples relate to hirers and participants using hire and drive vessels. Additional information would be required for staff of a hire and drive business. Having developed your policy, it's important to undertake a trial to ensure it's working as intended. Trials should be for a reasonable period, for 1 to 2 months, to help identify and address any problems. Ask key questions and encourage honest feedback from masters and crew to be satisfied that your policy is working. Once the policy has been developed, trialled, and you're sure it's fit for purpose, you can implement the policy into your safety management system. Your policy needs to be reviewed following any incident where drugs or alcohol may be a contributing factor, if the master or crew raise any concerns, and as a minimum during your annual SMS review to reflect any changes in legislation, best practices, or improvements you may identify. It is also important to stay informed about any changes in legal requirements that may affect your operation. We are now posting some useful links for you in the Q&A chat. Just prior to continuing the presentation, we would like to get an idea of how many of you already have a drug and alcohol policy. If you could add a thumbs up to the question in the Q&A chat. If you haven't, we hope that today's presentation and our website information gives you a few ideas. We now move on to master and designated person requirements. AMSA introduced these to help clarify and differentiate operational roles and responsibilities between the owner, master and designated person. The designated person is responsible for monitoring and supporting safe vessel operations, pollution prevention aspects of the vessel operation, and providing a link between those on board and management of the organisation. The designated person should be contactable by all crew working on the vessel and should be able to act on legitimate concerns. They do not need to be contactable 24/7, only as appropriate for the type of operation. To do this effectively, the designated person needs to have a direct access to the highest levels of shore-based management and should be able to ensure adequate resources and shore-based support can be provided to the vessel. As noted in the slide, a designated person responsibility statement is not required for a vessel that meets the eligibility criteria for a simplified SMS and the owner is the designated person. When developing your designated person responsibility statement, you need to include information on who holds the function of designated person, noting this could be more than one person depending on the size and nature of your operation, their contact information, and their roles and responsibilities. As you can see from the slide, in this example, when developing the designated person responsibility statement, the owner has considered the operations undertaken by vessels and crews, including the size and complexity of the operations, the need for out-of-hours contact with masters and crew, again not 24/7 as this is the responsibility of the emergency contact, the need for people with good knowledge of vessel operations and the safety management system, and the ability of the person to ensure appropriate resources and shore-based support to the vessel. You would also include details of who holds the function of designated person, and as mentioned before, this could be more than one person depending on the size and nature of your operation, as well as their contact information. There is no policy change to the Master's Responsibility and Authority Statement. This amendment clarifies the existing requirements. As noted in the slide, a Master's Responsibility and Authority Statement is not required if the owner is also the master and their vessels meet the eligibility criteria for a simplified SMS. Even though this amendment is only to clarify existing arrangements under Marine Order 504, It is important that vessel owners review their master's responsibility and authority statement to ensure it is clear that the master has authority to make decisions for the safety of the vessel, the environment, and persons on or near the vessel, and may request the owner's assistance to ensure the safety of the vessel, the environment, and persons on or near the vessel. And you can see the links that have been added to the chat with information on our website about this. We'll now take a short break to go through some of the questions in the Q&A chat and also to answer some commonly asked questions. And I'll pass over to Anita and Desley.
Thanks, Steve. And thanks to everybody who has posted questions in the Q&A chat. Please remember, if we don't get to your questions during the webinar, we will afterwards. I will now read some of your questions and provide the responses given by our team. First question is, how can I find out about the possible side effects of medication that my crew are taking?
I'll answer that one for you, Anita. So if a crew member is prescribed a new medication, their pharmacist should have given them a consumer medicine information leaflet. So that's a CMI. But for more information, visit the Health Direct Australia website, and there should be a link in the chat now, or consult your local healthcare pharmacist professional.
Thanks, Desley. Another question around drug and alcohol tests is, does AMSA expect a certain number of drug and alcohol tests to be conducted and recorded each year?
That's another good question. No, you won't be required to conduct and record a minimum number of tests, but vessel owners and operators have the flexibility to assess risks to their own operations. So owners will be able to decide what controls, through testing or otherwise, need to be implemented to ensure a vessel is not being operated while a master or crew member is impaired.
Thanks, Desley. Here's another one on alcohol. I believe a dry boat should be a basic safety precaution for all vessels. Why didn't AMSA prohibit alcohol for all crew on board commercial vessels?
Yeah, no, that is a good question. So vessel owners, in consultation with their master and crew, are the best placed people to develop a risk-based drug and alcohol policy. So this includes determining what is acceptable and unacceptable drug use. So this may include having a dry vessel policy where no alcohol is permitted, but also, on the other hand, crew may be permitted to have limited supply of alcohol at the end of their day. Where alcohol is allowed, though, vessel owners should consider how this will be managed and any impact it may have on the crew's ability to undertake duties, especially in an emergency.
Thank you, Desley. And here's another one that a lot of people would probably want to know about as well, is what happens if I find out one of my crew is under the influence when at sea?
Another good question. Yeah, so your drug and alcohol policy should consider this and how to prevent this from occurring. So this could include limiting alcohol consumption, running a dry boat, having a strict no drugs policy, etc. However, in the event that someone is under the influence, be it alcohol or non-prescribed medication or possibly side effects to prescribed medication, it is important to consider if they are of danger to themselves or others and how best to manage the situation.
Thank you, Desley. I'll now hand back to Steve to continue with the presentation.
Great. Thanks very much, Anita and Desley, and thanks everyone for your questions. Please keep them coming. We now move on to procedures for vessel operations. Class 1, 2 and 3 vessel owners, including those eligible for simplified safety management systems, are required to include additional procedures for key vessel operations in their SMS. It is important to remember that only those relevant to your vessel and operation need to be added. Owners must outline how they will manage the risks relating to these activities if relevant to the vessel and its operation. As you can see from the slide, vessels eligible for simplified SMS only need to include vessel access, and we'll discuss this in more detail during the simplified SMS webinar in April. It is important that you identify the procedures that are relevant to your operation, identify the risks involved with these procedures and the ways to control those risks. The risks and the controls both need to be recorded in your SMS risk assessment. In the example shown, we have chosen to look at passage planning. The risk assessment has considered several controls, including charts and nautical publications necessary for the intended voyager up to date, and this includes containing accurate, complete and up-to-date information regarding those navigational limitations and hazards which are of a permanent or predictable nature and which are relevant to the safe navigation of the vessel. Master and deck watchkeepers are appropriately qualified and trained, and master and deck watchkeepers are to ensure that the intended route from point of departure to the intended destination is planned and cross-checked. This is an example only and may not be applicable for your operation. Having identified the risks and the controls you intend to put in place, you now need to consider who will be responsible for implementing and monitoring the controls. In making this decision, you should consider the knowledge and training the person has and their ability to undertake the role as part of or in addition to their normal duties. For each control measure put into place, someone needs to ensure that it is implemented and followed. Depending on the control, this could be the owner, master, or a crew member. In this example, the majority of tasks have been given to the master. Having gone through the risk assessment process, including identifying key controls and who is responsible for implementing and managing the risks, you can now develop your procedure. Again, this is an example only and may not be applicable to all operations. Having developed your procedure, it's important to undertake a trial to ensure it's working as intended. Trials should be for a reasonable period for between 1 to 2 months to help identify and address any problems. Ensure you ask key questions and encourage honest feedback from the master and crew to be satisfied that it is working as intended. This then forms part of your safety management system, including training for new masters and deck watchkeepers. The emergency plan must include a procedure for responding to loss of propulsion and oil or fuel spills if relevant to the vessel and its operation. These changes came about because certain emergencies carry higher levels of risk which need to be managed. These new requirements are in addition to the existing emergency plan requirements such as fire, loss of steering, and collision. It is important that you identify the emergency procedures that are relevant to your operation, identify the risks involved and the ways to control the risks, and then to record the risks and controls in your safety management system risk assessment. In the example shown, we are considering loss of propulsion. The risk assessment has considered controls including that the outboard motor is serviced in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions, the coxswain is appropriately qualified and trained, and emergency procedures implemented and crew trained. Again, this is an example only and may not be applicable to your operations. Having identified the risks and the controls you intend to put in place, you now need to consider who will be responsible for implementing and monitoring the controls. In making this decision, you should consider the knowledge and training the person has and their ability to undertake the role as part of or in addition to their normal duties. In this example, the owner has shared the responsibilities between the master and themselves. As with all the examples shown throughout the presentation, this is an example only and may not be applicable to your operation. Having gone through the risk assessment process, identifying the key controls and who is responsible for implementing and managing the risks, you can now develop your emergency procedure. In this example, we have used a 6-metre Class 2D workboat. As with your other procedures, it is important to undertake a trial to ensure it's working as intended. Trials should be for a reasonable period to help identify and address any problems. Continue to ask key questions and encourage honest feedback from your masters and crew to be satisfied that this procedure, as with all your other procedures, is working as intended. This then forms part of your safety management system, including becoming part of your normal training program. We'll now take a short break to go through some more questions in the Q&A chat and also to answer some commonly asked questions. I'll pass back over to Anita and Desley.
Thanks for that, Steve. And thank you to everybody who's continuing to post questions in the Q&A chat. We'll go through some of those questions now and hopefully answer some of them. Okay, the first question is, our designated person responsibility statement doesn't look anything like the example shown. Do we need to change it?
The example shown is a guide to help industry in developing their own. So if you already have a designated person responsibility statement and it covers the roles and responsibilities applicable to your operation, then you don't need to change it. We do recommend, however, that you review it to ensure that it remains current and includes details of the designated persons and their current contact information.
Thanks, Desley. Another question is, can the designated person and emergency contact be the same person?
Yes, they certainly can. So, however, it is important that we distinguish between the two functions. But for more information about that, you can have a look on the AMSA website. Actually, I think there might be a link in the chat now where you should be able to come up with some of the responses there.
Thanks, Desley. The next question is, can the master be a designated person as well?
Thanks, Bonnie, for your question. So the designated person plays a key role in the effective implementation of the safety management system and does take responsibility for monitoring and supporting the vessel for all safety aspects. The role is usually shore-based to ensure continued support in the safety management system implementation. However, there is no set rule about who can hold the position of designated person. As long as the function can be effectively managed, this will largely depend on the size of the organisation and, of course, the type of the operation.
Thanks, Desley. And another question we've got here is, what if one of the procedures listed in MO 504 is not applicable to my vessel or my operation?
So if a procedure for vessel operations listed in Marine Order 504 is not applicable to your vessel or operation, you don't need to include the procedure in your vessel's SMS. For example, if your vessel doesn't have a confined space, you won't need to include a procedure for confined space entry. However, in some circumstances, you will find that additional procedures to those listed in Marine Order 504 are required to address risks identified by the vessel's risk assessment.
Thanks, Desley. And now I'll hand back to Steve to continue with the presentation.
Thanks, Anita, and thanks, Desley. And again, thanks to everyone for putting in your questions. There will be more opportunity at the end of the presentation, so please keep them coming. We now move on to assembly station requirements. From the 1st of June 2025, the requirement to have an alternative assembly station no longer depends on the number of persons carried on board. The new requirement is that alternative assembly stations are only required if practical, based on the vessel's layout, characteristics, and a risk assessment. These new requirements apply to all Class 1, 2 and 3 vessels, except for those eligible to operate under simplified SMS. When considering your assembly station requirements, you need to consider how an alternative assembly station can control risks, whether an alternative assembly station is practical based on the vessel's layout, characteristics and risk assessment, and where to locate an alternative assembly station. Having considered these key questions and any others you may have, you need to update your risk assessment to reflect any changes. Having reviewed your risk assessment, it's time to update your emergency plan. You should, as part of your plan, identify at least one assembly station, the primary assembly station for all persons on board, an alternative to an assembly station that becomes unusable or inaccessible during emergency if it's determined as practicable in your risk assessment, arrangements for assigning a crew member to each assembly station, a system for use in emergency for the crew to record and confirm the presence of all persons on board, and how often emergency procedures, including assembly station drills, will be practiced. If you operate passenger vessels, you will need to ensure that your emergency plan includes the location of each assembly station, what passengers must do in an emergency, how passengers are to find, put on and secure life jackets, placement of appropriate signage to guide passengers to the assembly station, placement of what to do in an emergency information in each assembly station, passenger cabin and other areas frequented by passengers, and placement of appropriate signage and information on how to find, put on and secure life jackets in each assembly station, passenger cabin and other areas frequented by passengers. You can see the link to our website for further information that's being added to the chat. Having reviewed your risk assessment, identified key actions and who is responsible for implementing and managing the actions, you can now update your emergency plan. In this example, we look at the emergency procedure for abandoning a vessel. Having developed your plan, it's important to undertake a trial to ensure it's working as intended. Trials should be for a reasonable period for 1 to 2 months to help identify and address any problems. Ask key questions and encourage honest feedback from the master and crew to be satisfied that your plan is working as intended. This then forms part of your safety management system, including training for crew. Vessel owners are required to address operational risk to vessel stability by meeting the 2 requirements shown. Identifying the risk to vessel stability in the risk assessment applies to all vessels except those eligible for simplified SMS. Although even when operating under a simplified SMS, owners should still identify and manage risks such as vessel loading through the risk assessment process. Vessel operators also need to keep a record of modifications affecting vessel stability for all Class 1, 2 and 3 vessels. AMSA introduced this requirement because failure to adequately assess stability risks, including modifying your vessel, can and has led to vessels capsizing. When thinking of the key risks to your vessel stability, consider any modifications you have undertaken or plan to undertake to your vessel, including installing new equipment or fishing gear, overloading or weight creep, towing, loss of watertight integrity, free surface effects including water on deck, accidental flooding, and rough sea state and weather conditions that you may operate in. Having considered these key questions and any others you may have, you need to update your risk assessment to reflect any changes. It is important that owners, masters and crew all learn about stability risks, and to assist with this, AMSA has some good resources on our website relating to stability for fishing vessels, construction barges and towing operations. The best way to verify if a risk to stability has been appropriately considered is to assess the vessel against the applicable stability criteria in the National Standard for Commercial Vessels, or if applicable, the Uniform Shipping Laws Code. Using competent persons such as accredited marine surveyors and naval architects will greatly assist with this. In some instances, operations may have to be modified for the vessel to remain stable and compliant with the stability book. If you don't know, ask a competent person such as an accredited marine surveyor or naval architect. Having reviewed your risk assessment, identifying key actions, risks and controls, these are added to your risk assessment and are then used to assist in updating your emergency procedure. This then forms part of your safety management system, including as part of your normal training program. And again, this is an example only. As already mentioned, modifications to the structure or equipment of a vessel may change its stability and the way it behaves at sea. Previous coronial findings have found that vessel modifications were factors in vessels sinking or capsizing. This requirement does not affect existing obligations to advise AMSA of vessel modifications, such as the obligations under Marine Order 503 for certificates of survey, Marine Safety Exemption 40 for Class C restricted operations, and Marine Safety Exemption 2 for certificates of survey for non-survey vessels. Under these requirements, vessel owners are legally required to inform AMSA of modifications made to their vessel. Depending on the extent of the modifications, the vessel may need to have its stability reassessed by an accredited marine surveyor and undergo other survey requirements. Despite these mandatory reporting requirements, it is important that masters and crew are also aware of any modifications made to the vessel that may impact stability. This will help them decide how they use the vessel and what conditions are safe to operate in. The examples of modifications shown in this slide may not apply to your vessel. However, they are a good starting point. Things like hull or superstructure modifications, addition, removal or relocation of fixed and movable ballast, addition or modifications to trawling, towing or lift apparatus apart from like-to-like replacement of apparatus that is addressed in the stability assessment of the vessel, addition of external plastic curtains or clears, addition, removal or modification of the size or location of tanks such as fuel, fresh water, wastewater, lube oil, ballast water, sludge, live bait, fish tanks and fish bins or cargo tanks. Addition, removal, relocation or replacement of machinery including propulsion engines that are not a like-for-like replacement. The addition, removal, relocation or replacement of accommodation fit-out or equipment that would alter the displacement, trim or raise the centre of gravity of the vessel from the light ship condition for which it was previously approved, such as cabins, refrigerators, air conditioning, compressors, cool rooms, ice rooms, and variation to the operational load of the vessel, including cargo and personal weights and their location. In this example, the vessel has recently undergone a refit of the main saloon area. The master has had the work assessed and signed off by an accredited marine surveyor and duly recorded in the logbook. AMSA has a number of handy resources available on our website that you may find useful. Please see the link that has been added to the chat. You can also find these resources and others by adding keywords in the search function at the top of the AMSA homepage. We'll also ensure links are included with the uploaded copy of this presentation and provided to webinar participants. We're reaching the end of the webinar, but prior to finishing up, we'd like to remind you to complete the short survey to ensure our webinars meet your needs. I'll pass over again to Anita and Desley to go through some more questions in the Q&A.
Thanks, Steve. And final thanks to everybody today for contributing to our webinar by asking these great questions. And we have a few more to read out now. So the first question is, if a crew is on board and takes a drug which affects their judgment, what measures can the master take to confine the crew?
That's a good question. So the master should try to prevent any situation from escalating. So it is best to make sure that they try to talk to the affected person calmly and try to keep them in a safe space. So if the person's actions are endangering the safety of the vessel or people on the vessel, the master should take responsible steps to secure the safety of the vessel.
Thanks, Desley. The next question is, can our corporate alcohol and drug policy be referenced in the SMS? Should we add high-level dot points from the policy in the SMS?
So if you already have a drug and alcohol policy in place that meets your workplace health and safety obligations, you should check that a copy is included in the vessel's SMS. You have inducted all your existing crew or staff on the policy. You are inducting all new crew and staff when they join the vessel or operation. And you should also regularly train your crew and staff on the policy and how it works in practice.
Thanks, Desley. The next question is, do vessels operating under a simplified SMS need to include an assembly station?
Vessels that meet the eligibility criteria for a simplified SMS will not be required to include an assembly station in the vessel's emergency plan. However, owners are encouraged to include one where it is practically based on the vessel's layout and characteristics and is risk assessed.
Thanks for that, Desley. The next question is, how can I get a copy of this presentation to share with my crew?
So we'll email all the attendees a copy of the presentation, the Q&A summary, and a recording of the webinar. This information will also be available on the AMSA website, but please allow about a week for our team to review the questions from the chats and they can prepare the responses as well.
Great, thanks for that. The next question is the addition of a drug and alcohol policy a new addition for all vessels, SMSs?
Yeah, thanks for this question, Pat. As of the 1st of June 2025, there will be an explicit requirement in Marine Order 504 for a drug and alcohol policy to be included in the vessel's SMS. So while this is a new requirement, many DCV owners and operators may already have a drug and alcohol policy in place due to the workplace health and safety obligations.
Thank you. The next question is, I have members who are not eligible for a simplified SMS because they have net reel or petrol inboard engines. They then need to adhere to the passage planning stipulation for a vessel 6 metres open vessel with no cabin or wheelhouse. This works well if on larger vessels, but this is not practicable.
Yeah, sounds very interesting. But we intend to monitor the performance of the simplified SMS approach when it comes into effect on the 1st of June 2025, and we'll examine whether the eligibility criteria is fit for purpose and balance the safety and the burden on industry. So there will be a webinar focused on the new simplified SMS arrangements on the 9th of April 2025.
Great, thanks, Desley. And the next question is, if our vessel does not qualify for a simplified SMS, but it is a small vessel, 5.5 metres, do we have to have an assembly station?
If your vessel does not qualify for a simplified SMS, you will be required to identify an assembly station for the vessel in the vessel's emergency plan.
Thanks, Desley. And now I'll hand back to Steve.
Thanks very much, Anita, and thanks, Desley. And again, thank you, everyone, for all the questions. So, yeah, they'll all be added to the package that's sent out to you afterwards as well. So you'll get all those questions and more if we haven't been able to answer any. So just prior to closing, I'd like to remind everyone that there is one more webinar coming up on the changes to 504. If you haven't already done so, you can now register for the Simplified SMS webinar on the AMSA website or through the link in the chat. And we look forward to seeing you again on the 9th of April.
Thank you, Steve. We would like to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. To help the team make sure the future webinars are valuable use of your time, we would appreciate your feedback. Please click on the link in the chat to conduct a short survey. If you haven't already registered for the next webinars, we encourage you to do so, and please let others know. We hope to see you in April for our next webinar. Thank you.